Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance in this amazing dialogue with the new Untouchables. We are recording this on Friday, May 29th, 2026, at approximately 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And as always, this administration, in the folly of what we're in the midst of, that is nothing to joke about, is unwinding at lightning speed as always. And this team is there every week to put perspective on it and encapsulate what's going on from legal experts that basically bring the last 30 to 40 years of being in the trenches of fighting corruption and fraud and winning, but in an era where it just seems like the wheels have fallen off our country. And I would like to welcome to the program somebody who hasn't been here for some time, but who is so notable. He's literally Donald Trump's most, shall we say, I think out of your words, and I hope I'm not getting this wrong, but most hated journalist, the one and only David Kaye Johnston. And he is also the editor of DC Reports. And we certainly love to see Paul Peltier's recent op-ed published. So wonderful to see you back here. Just a quick introduction before I tee you up, David Kaye, to start us off. Today was quite extraordinary from the standpoint that we saw, obviously, a lot of reaction from Pam Bondi's testimony regarding the Epstein files and refusal to answer and everything that obviously illuminates. Throughout it all, I continued to hear everybody talking about that was the largest cover-up, the Epstein scenario is the largest cover-up in the history of the world. I don't want to compare apples to oranges. The horrific nature and the magnitude of everything that we've seen from the Epstein files, including the horrific, behavior and predation of children, which is almost beyond comprehension that this has not been dealt with until now in the way that it has. But I also want to point out that the cover-up that led to us all coming together was the aftermath of the 2008 great financial crisis that literally had millions of victims and led to tens of trillions of dollars, both in destroying the economy as well as all sorts of different sort of financial safety measures that went to the people that actually destroyed the country. What was kind of a precursor to everything that we're in the midst of. But I could go on about that. I'd like to start with none other than David Kaye Johnston. And you have told us from the very beginning, David Kaye, of the scenario of Donald Trump going back to the 70s, literally. And not to mention his family going back now, I think 100 plus years of 3 generations of a crime family and everything that illuminates. But you also, as I recall, mentioned that Donald Trump was engaged with known criminal drug traffickers with real estate deals that you covered in the 80s. That was a huge story that you had difficulty getting through the channels of media at that time. I noticed this week that Donald Trump is about to have Scott Bessent, our Secretary of Treasury, approve a $250 bill with the president's face on it. How does that land with you?
Well, it's another example of Donald's more than 40-year history of doing extraordinary favors for serious drug traffickers. Jim Henry, more than 55 years ago, proposed in the Washington Monthly that we eliminate all bills larger than $100 because larger bills, $500 bills, $1,000 bills, and even $100 bills were very useful for drug traffickers and for money laundering. And Donald Trump, if he violates the law by printing money with his picture on it, because since 1861, the law has been that no living person may have their image on American currency, will be doing an enormous favor for the criminal class, particularly drug traffickers, because they can move lots of money through these large denomination bills. Now, this shouldn't happen, but it's part of a pattern. And Donald is drawn to criminals the way a moth is drawn to a light. It just is who he is. And many people believe, well, he was in the real estate business in New York. He's a big developer, so he had to deal with the mob. That's not the story. That's Donald's story. The story is that the major developers in New York, and Donald was never in the top 5 or probably the top 10 developers even for a single year, ended up in a situation in the early 1980s, I'm sorry, where they simply couldn't make a profit because the local mob, particularly the Gambino and Genovese crime families, were so deep into their pockets that they couldn't do business. They went to the Reagan Justice Department and the FBI and said, "You got to help us out. You got to stop this. These people have moved from their traditional businesses into things like they control the concrete business, and we need you to root these people out." And Rudy Giuliani, the U.S. attorney in the Southern District, had his prosecutors, it wasn't Rudy himself, it was his prosecutors, began seriously working because people like the Lafracks and the Resnicks went to the government and took the incredible risk in doing so. While the other developers all ran to the FBI, Donald ran to the mob. And one of the best proofs of that is that when Trump Tower was under construction, it is a 58, not as Donald says 68, but a 58-story concrete building. It is not the traditional steel girder building, it's cement. There was a concrete strike organized by the mob and especially directed by John Cody, who ran the Teamsters in New York. Every cement project in New York, every concrete project came to a halt. Didn't matter, you just putting in a new driveway in Queens, you couldn't get your concrete delivered, except one project, Trump Tower, where the cement trucks kept coming. They kept being let through the gate by the Teamsters, who control the gate at a construction site in Manhattan, which told you how deeply Donald was involved. And indeed, when Fat Tony Salerno, who, depending on which story you want to believe, was the head of one of the families or was number two, was convicted and sent to prison where he died, one of the charges he was convicted on was overpricing the concrete for Trump Plaza, an apartment building on East 61st Street. At the same time this was going on, Donald had all sorts of entangled business relationships with a man named Joe Wexelbaum. Joe was a two-time convicted felon. He was a front for mobsters. He's Jewish, so he wasn't a made guy. I don't want anybody to get the wrong impression, but he was a crook through and through. And the Drug Enforcement Administration built a solid case against him for bringing in tons of marijuana and tons of cocaine from Colombia to Miami. Joe actually, let me digress for a minute. The chairman of ExxonMobil's probably never pumped gasoline for customers. But Joe literally handled the drugs and loaded them into vans and cars that went from his luxury used car dealership in North Miami to Cincinnati for the drugs to be distributed. And when he got caught, he did the smart thing as a two-time loser. He wrote a complete confession, handwritten confession. You've seen Law and Order, here's a legal pad, tell us what happened. And he did. Well, the mules in that case, the people who simply drove the drugs from North Miami to Cincinnati, they were sentenced to 20 years in prison each. Joe asked that and there's a court rule that allows this, that his case be transferred for sentencing since he had pled guilty to either Miami, where he owned a home, or New York, where he had an apartment that he rented through a complex. Sounds like a huge discount deal, but it makes it look like he's actually paying full rent in New York City at the Trump Plaza apartments on East 61st. Instead of going to either the Southern District or Miami, the case is transferred to Newark, New Jersey, where no crime is alleged to have occurred, and the case is put before a newly appointed federal judge, someone who in his dying days, the notorious Roy Cohn, called up Ronald Reagan and said, "Please appoint this person to the federal bench." Marianne Trump Berry, Donald's older sister. Now, a few weeks after getting this case, Marianne goes down the hall to the chief judge in New Jersey and says, "I have to recuse myself from this case." Why? Well, because Joe Wexelbaum is the guy who provides my brother with his helicopters for his casino business, and he is the personal pilot of the Ivana which is what Donald called his fancy European helicopter. And he's flown me many times. And every week, my husband, who is a lawyer for the Trump casinos, flies multiple times from Newark down to Atlantic City on business. So the case is removed to a judge who ends up becoming her closest friend on the bench. They go to lunch together all the time. Everybody knows they're palsy-walsy. And Joe Wexelbaum, the kingpin, tons of drugs. He is sentenced to 36 months in the federal correction facility in Manhattan. This is more like a hotel room you're locked into. You have a phone and internet and things like that, and a television. Joe serves 18 months. Now, to get out, you have to establish that you have a job and you're going to pay your fines. And Joe tells his parole officer that he has a job as soon as he gets out. He's going back to work for Donald as his helicopter guy. He, however, doesn't pay his $30,000 federal fine. He sends in 3 checks of $200 each and then stops. But somehow he ends up living in a double apartment in Trump Tower on one of the highest floors, which his girlfriend, effectively his common law wife, gets without a mortgage, or any public record anyway of any kind of a mortgage. And how did that come about? Well, Donald wrote a letter to the judge. And in the letter, he says, oh, Joe Wexelbaum is a stand-up guy. He's a, quote, credit to the community, close quote, and shouldn't serve any time in prison at all. If you read that letter, any of us who've dealt with law enforcement, especially Mark and Paul, can point out to you that that letter is clearly not written to the judge. It's written to Joe. And it says, between the lines, keep your mouth shut, pal, and I'll take care of you. And oh my God, did he take care of him? So Donald, his pardon czar, was one of the biggest drug traffickers in America, a woman in Memphis who ran a vicious mob. They imported hundreds of tons of cocaine. Kim Kardashian took her cause up and said, oh, she's a poor victim here. She was just a one-time, shouldn't have gotten a lifetime prison sentence for what she did. Nonsense. She was a serious heavyweight drug lord, and she is now Donald Trump's pardon czar. Donald Trump pardoned the president of Honduras, a country I've had to go to repeatedly because my late sister-in-law, who was an American diplomat, was stationed there. And this guy was notorious, the president of Honduras, for his criminal activity. Donald let him go. There are a bunch of other drug dealers he's let go. Donald has been the best friend that drug traffickers, and I don't mean penny ante neighborhood dealers, I mean really serious drug lords. He's the best friend they've ever had in America. So the $250 bill he wants to produce, what a favor to drug traffickers, how much easier to move money. I mean, one of the best ways to launder money these days, are watches. You see those ads in the New York Times for $600,000 wristwatches? Who would buy a $600,000 wristwatch, especially a mechanical one that's not nearly as good as an electronic one? Money launderers, that's who. You want to launder money? Go to one of Trump's casinos and sit down with the person you want to launder the money with and play baccarat, just the two of you. Every bet, the house gets its vigorish, its share, 1.75%. And you gamble until the guy who you're sending the money to can walk away with what he's entitled to minus this slim amount that the house gets. And now you've cleaned your money. And so we need to understand that we have a man in the White House who throughout his career has gratuitously gone to help all sorts of criminals who had nothing to do with the real estate business, but especially drug traffickers, because there's so much money there. And I have said plainly, and I'll say again here, the only logical, sensible explanation for what Donald Trump did for Joe Wexelbaum is that he was in the drug business with him.
Wow. I got to tell you, and I'm going to put in the description down below, everyone. I couldn't hide my facial response to that. It was such an amazing story. But to remind the viewers, David Kaye Johnston has literally been on these stories for decades, including the taxes and every aspect. I think you've had 3 or 4 specific books on Don's Don's criminal activity for literally decades. And I when I'm thinking about Joe Wexelbaum there, David, it was like right out of a Sopranos episode. Not to mention that
Yeah,
when you said a made guy, but he was Jewish, he couldn't be a made guy because he was Jewish. I wondered if Roy Cohn, the actual master that would lead to the real apprentice, not to be confused about that other potential laundering apprentice that NBC greenlit, was a made guy. But all that being equal, boy, Mark Dan, it just seems to me as the former state AG of the great state of Ohio, and you're obviously in private practice now and helping consumers and fighting the good fight every chance you get. But again, racketeering, the stuff inside and out, and it just seems like this is a dream of the history of the mob to be able to turn it into the weaponization of justice, like the Joker in Gotham. I mean, E. Jean Carroll comes to mind, given everything that's happened the last couple of days.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that, but I also I don't think David Kaye that that you should underestimate the value. I mean, the gift of crypto was such a good one that he's continued to give to money launderers and drug dealers.
absolutely, Mark.
That the $250 bill, is quaint in comparison to it. But I do like the thought of dealers snorting cocaine out of with a rolled up Donald Trump facing $250 bill. I think he would love that. And you know him better than all of us, but seems to me that that's exactly the scenario he'd like to see in the popular media. So there's that. Yeah, I mean it is. It is truly amazing, and I gotta believe that the patience of the American people is starting to wear thin with this constant stream of self-aggrandizement and embarrassment, and his helping himself to the Justice Department once again this week with the E. Jean Carroll prosecution, or the prosecution of the funders of her litigation and E. Jean Carroll through the Northern District of Illinois. The prosecution, I think may have been last week or the week before, of the Southern Poverty Law Project. Some of the finest people I know doing some of the best work in the country, filling in the gap in years where the Justice Department isn't actively engaged in civil rights enforcement, like now. It's organizations like the Southern Poverty Law Center that step in and fill the gap, and to try to use the Justice Department, to co-opt the Justice Department to criminalize critics or even people that Trump disagrees with, is the epitome of the beginnings of fascism. And then finally, the illegal, and I'm all over the place because there's just so much going on. But we have a huge in my former hometown of Youngstown, Ohio. There's a huge private prison that is now full of immigration detainees. But the fact is that the light is starting to shine now on the treatment of those detainees, many of whom have committed no crime at all, many of whom are there by mistake, many of whom I think we'll ultimately find out are American citizens. The abuse, the horrible food, the horrible conditions, the overcrowding in those privately run detention facilities, all for the purpose of enriching Trump's donors, all for the purpose of I mean, really, the only thing that Trump's, and pardon the expression, Trump's commitment to the grift is his commitment to his own small manhood, and his desire to use the tools of the federal government to settle his own petty briefs. His ego is really the only thing that surpasses his commitment to the grift, which is too bad for his criminal partners in all this, because he could make a lot more money if he didn't spend all this time and political capital and energy on his petty bullshit beefs with people like E. Jean Carroll and the Southern Poverty Law Center and others. It continues to be amazing. Now, I opened the New York Times app for a minute before we started today, and I did see some good news. The federal courts once again are holding in favor of the rule of law and the prerogatives of Congress over the executive. My good friend Joyce Beatty, representative of Ohio, so I got to give an Ohio plug here. One of our majority black districts that may very well be endangered now that the Supreme Court has said that doesn't matter anymore. But Joyce is the ex officio member of the Kennedy Center board. She sued to stop the renaming of the Kennedy Center to Trump, to the Trump Kennedy Center, and she got her injunction today. A second injunction was issued in a separate case in D.C. I'm sorry, in the Eastern District of Virginia, putting a stop to the slush fund until there can be a full hearing on those issues. So once again, despite the best efforts of the executive branch, despite the best efforts of the Trump appointed members of the U.S. Supreme Court to create a perfect environment for open corruption and graft and grift, the federal judiciary, certainly at the district court level, and for the most part at the appellate level, is holding in favor of the rule of law. And if they could just continue to do that and hold out long enough for either the U.S. Supreme Court to change, Congress to change, which is only now in a matter of months, potentially, 11 months from now, 10 months from now, we could have a Democratic majority in both the House and the Senate. We'll do a bunch of episodes if that ever happens on what they should do with it, because we know that they'll screw that up as we have every other opportunity in recent history. But the fact is that the court, the fact that the courts are holding to a group of lawyers like we are, and people who care about the rule of law, I think is just so important. And so, as bad as the things are going on, as brazen as this brazen, petty, personal, vindictive behavior continues, as this open grift continues, the one bright spot is that the court, the lower courts, and the courts of appeals, the circuit courts are still holding the line in favor of the rule of law, separation of powers, I think at this point in this administration, that's about all we can ask for.
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up after David Kaye just illuminated us to this literal direct correlation to all things criminal activity, to having Trump's name side by side with one of the greatest presidents in the United States history of the United States, John F. Kennedy. So thank you for that. I would like to turn this to you, Ms. Carbone. June Carbone, the Rubino Chair of Law, Science, and Technology at the University of Minnesota. I was curious this week how you might be interpreting, as we talk about all the time, the plan for what Democrats must do. I happen to see on Lawrence O'Donnell this week, there was a bit of a platforming, if you will, because it's such an important race in Texas, between what's going to be obviously maybe the second most criminal or corrupt politician in the United States, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, against this newcomer who seems like pretty young in the saddle, quite frankly, James Talarico. But boy, the ads and the mean-spirited scenario of what's happening in Texas, I'm curious if you think Mr. Talarico has the chops to rise above, as it were.
Yeah, I think this is a test not just for him, but for the ability of Democrats to fight back. So we have this massive corruption. We've barely touched the surface here. And now you've got Ken Paxton, the Attorney General of Texas. impeached by Republicans in the Texas legislature. Couldn't quite get the numbers to convict him in the Texas Senate. Uh, ratted out by his own employees for criminal activity, divorced by his wife on biblical grounds. Wife, by the way, who was there in the Texas legislature hearing his impeachment. She did not vote to impeach him, by the way, until after he betrayed her. And so what you've got is the poster child for outright corruption. And what's his solution? Hey, Talarico, let's call him a vegan. Worst thing you can say about somebody, a vegan.
That's the felony in Texas.
For the record, he's a good Texas boy. He has been at barbecue places eating meat. He's not a vegan. But how is he responding? How are the Democrats going to respond? Well, Talarico is earnest. He does his homework. He's there saying, this is a distraction. This is the most corrupt politician maybe in Texas history, and that's saying something. Donald Trump not being a Texan. And he stuck to message. He stuck to his guns. What he lacked, a sense of humor. Hey, if you can't make jokes about being a vegan, you should be able to. But he's resisting the urge to be defensive. But the question is, how do they get away with these things? And I fear the thing we're not seeing is how the message is being delivered. So on the one hand, I look at Talarico. Talarico to me looks like a seminarian. He still looks, I think 37. He still looks like he might be 18. And so he doesn't exude the dominance of somebody with a deeper voice. Graham Plattner, for example, has the advantage of sounding tough. Talarico might actually be tough, but he does look like a choir boy. And so how is he going to pull this off? Well, one of the things going on Massey's defeat in Kentucky is not just did the PACs send an enormous amount of money into Kentucky, but they used AI to vilify Massey. Now, we all have followed Massey for long before he became a champion of the release of the Epstein files. But Massey is a true conservative. There are any number of Republican speakers of the House who have no love for Thomas Massey. But they ran a smear campaign on him. Now, it's possible that all it really did is turn out the true believers. And that's all you needed in a primary, and that's not getting that much attention outside of the true believers. But it's also possible that we're not seeing the way that those with a lot of money are manipulating the media environment in a way that is utterly corrupt. And Bill keeps telling me what the conservative right wing is saying. I don't hear any of it. I don't know a lot of it exists. I don't watch that stuff. I am not the most savvy observer or consumer of what's going down on the media these days. But it's important to emphasize that somebody like Ken Paxton, who is a total grifter, who is as disreputable as they come, has a whole lot of money to distort the image of a guy who tried to run an uplifting campaign where he talks about Christian values, about where he goes into communities who don't see a whole lot of politicians running for state office. And the smear campaigns, he's talked about there being 6 genders. Oh, he must be gay. Oh, his girlfriend, who refuses to be identified because she knows that she will be the subject of death threats and all kinds of things, must be fake. That the attacks on him are absolutely unprincipled. And the question is, how is the Democratic Party, not just Talarico, going to counter that? So when I saw him on Lawrence O'Donnell, I thought he was earnest. He stuck to his script. He did not go off message. He says this is about something other than whether they meet. And all I'd like to see is a better sense of humor. but I'm not the person to advise him. You can ask Bill about humor.
I want to follow up if you don't mind with that, but just a quick comment. As a producer, Trump, this is all high school. I think anybody who had, like, from National Lampoon that I grew up with, or Mad Magazine, would have a field day, or quite frankly, South Park. But there's no commitment to people who can deliver the satire. And I appreciate your point. But last week you provided one of the most profound framings I think I've seen since we've discussed this. And it started with what we're looking at as an intersection. It almost is like a triad, if we will, between corruption, sexual perversion, and tax exempt statuses for religion. Can you kind of just close with that? Because it was wild.
Oh, sure. So there is renewed attention being focused on the head of the Southern Baptist Convention. So if you go back to, say, 1972, the Southern Baptist Convention actually had a moderately pro-choice plank in its platform. As a big tent, as what had become a mainstream religious group, it was moderated. And the guy who took it over both took it over and drove it farther to the right, and did so, becoming an instrument of the moral majority and an arm of the Republican Party. And in driving it, in making it more extreme, he also covered up all kinds of sexual indiscretions, on the order of the Catholic Church priest scandals. But we did a whole bunch of studies, looking at Silicon Valley, looking at startup culture, looking at Uber, but looking also at mainstream companies. And the more you reward the people who can break the rules and get away with it, the more you reward the dark triad. You hire for narcissists, you hire for people who can, who are amoral, who are disdainful of the established order, and who promise, like Elon Musk, to deliver big things. You also find they think they're God's gift, well, to men or women, whoever they're attracted to, and that they are entitled to the sexual favors of those who are under them. In fact, the literature is so extreme that it suggests that there is a personality profile that Silicon Valley chooses for. And the dark side is that personality profile is a group of people who think that their subordinates should be flattered if they pay attention, express sexual interest, and often are so lacking in empathy, with the lack of empathy being one of the defining characteristics of the personality type, that they don't recognize the discomfort and assume that the person welcomes the attention of a superior who is obviously so much more powerful than they are. Ken Paxton illustrates all those traits. But so did the head of the Southern Baptist Convention, who is responsible for making it a weapon in the culture wars and in politics.
Yeah, and as Bill has laid out so many times, Bill Black, that to be a part of this administration, you have to lie. And boy, the perversion is in every direction. I want to ask you this question, because what comes to mind, Lewis Clark, the executive director of the Government Accountability Project. We speak week in and week out from your perspective about whistleblowers and things that you've been involved with and your long storied career. In fact, I saw Aaron Brockovich last night on national television, whom of course you worked with back during that time period. But being amidst the AI data center dump. But the question I have for you, given this absurdity, you always seem to come up with great shining light sort of scenarios, because you're always having breakthroughs with the initiatives and the suits that you guys are in the midst of. But just a quick comment about, for the public to understand what the Government Accountability Project has been in the midst of. So we're all talking about Epstein again. We all are aware of the terrible tragedy of the government not responding and children literally being brutalized by the Epstein class, right? Lewis Clark, 6 months ago, with the Government Accountability Project, were able to get a stay to save, I believe, 327 Nicaraguan or Guatemalan, I'm not sure which. Guatemalan children from being extracted from the United States to known sex trafficking rings that was happening, and I think they were potentially a pipeline to many thousands of more. That was happening while we're all focused on Doge and all the flood the zone type of stuff. Obviously, you've heard your colleagues, but I just wanted the audience to once again be aware of the type of work that you and your team do.
Yeah, one of the things that we're hoping for, I guess, is that we as a nation, and certainly we as citizens of this nation, or citizens, I should say, probably residents of this nation, uh, hopefully will start focusing on is evidence, which we've just heard so much today already, and not the culture wars. The culture wars is the device at which our leaders are using in order to keep us divided, so that people in Texas will vote against someone who's obviously courageous and righteous, and certainly anti-corruption. And to get people to vote because he might be a vegan or he might be this or that. I mean, it's just this enchilada. It's just like an incredible, um, multi-billion-dollar essentially attempt to keep the American people divided on things like woke and anti-woke, et cetera, and to ignore evidence, facts, corruption, and that's what the struggle is. And what we get with whistleblowers is we get people who are as many Republicans as Democrats coming forward and just saying what they see, and just providing evidence about corruption, regardless of politics and regardless of whether a person is Republican or Democrat or conservative or whatnot. It just doesn't make any difference. They just want to have us as a nation look at what's actually happening on the ground through our institutions, certainly through every federal agency at this moment.
Do you want to respond to the idea that Aaron Brockovich is back out there again with regards to what is seemingly
Well,
a
she's been pretty much out there, in communities throughout the country ever since the movie was made. I'm actually she has presented at some of our events, or at least one major event that we had at the Government Accountability Project, where our real friendship comes is with her with her movie, movie executive producers, and she that's they discovered her and certainly presented an accurate picture of her. And even at that point, I'm not a little bit inside scoop here, but basically, there was certain attempts by certain story writers who wanted to have her have an affair with the lawyer in the movie. It's depicted in the movie because that'd be more interesting to the American public. And not only did the producers stand up with Aaron Brockovich and say no, but Aaron as well said no, even though her contract might have allowed that to happen. But nevertheless, it's like that's what we need to do: is this talk about the evidence, and this don't talk about, that's don't deal with or focus on whatever the morality might be, or a person's interpretation of morality might be.
yeah, but to June's point, the overwhelming social media is fed by the rage bait, and we are
Yeah,
just so immersed in propaganda. And I'll turn
yeah,
that to my colleague Eric Vaughn, proprietor of Redpoint Digital. I think the most I don't know, capable director as it comes to being able to put these complex stories together. And you were working like crazy about on the ICE facilities, in addition to other elements that just seemingly are everywhere at the moment. I thought right when we started, if you had any comments about the Pope's encyclical.
Yeah, well, that one was the one that came out last weekend was specifically about AI, which I think was it was a nice moment for me, as a Catholic, that that the Catholic Church is to the left of most of to the left of this on this particular issue, which I think is a great little novelty. But I think the important things there is that I think that there's a place where it's like, you have wedge issues that split the population. I think this is like whatever the inverse of that would be, a convergence issue, because AI and all of the apparatus that goes around this, and you know about this as far as like the data center issue in Utah. Well, we have a very similar data center issue here in Ohio. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, if you know about this, but I think that the one that's being planned in Ohio is going to be either the nation's or the world's biggest data center.
Yeah.
If
no,
and
there
when it's
is.
completed.
Right. Well, and there's also a story today that the state's been giving sales tax exemption to data centers, and representing that it was costing us in the low hundreds of millions of dollars. And turns out they've already given away $1.8 billion in sales tax breaks to data centers in Ohio. To the point where even the current Republican governor announced that he wasn't going to approve any more. Of course, that's taking money out of local governments as well as the state government. So that's just the state share is 1.8 billion. Shameless subsidies to business that go on here, and just embarrassing.
Oh, right. For an absolute paucity of jobs. I mean,
Right. No jobs. I mean,
right.
Once the construction work is done, I actually had a bit of a loud conversation with somebody from the building trades yesterday about the fact that those short-term transient construction jobs just can't be worth enough to them to make this the hill they die on politically.
Well,
Um,
it's the same set of lies that were given to all of us, with the fracking boom, right? I mean, it's supposed
yeah,
to be all these jobs. No,
right,
that certainly didn't end up being the case either. And
right.
so, I mean, it's really sort of the same old, same old. I mean, so much of what's been talked about today, it's like I'm getting flashbacks to when we were making the con. I mean, it's the
Yep.
same thing. I mean, it's like I almost wish that there was like a new grift,
Right.
I don't know, make my synapses fire off in a slightly different way. But going back to the Pope, what I think is really um, encouraging about that is that he was focusing it on people, saying that the dignity of work and the dignity of the human needs to be paramount. And I think that's the biggest thing that is completely being attacked and assaulted, by this AI boom and all the apparatus that goes along with it. I mean, the Trump administration comes in and basically does everything it possibly can to destroy the social safety net, and then they do everything they possibly can to basically put people out of work who at that point would need the social safety net more than they ever would. And all the while, they're also like, I got a piece of mail the other day saying that I should expect a 30% increase in my electrical bill this month. And so we're getting that. Water is becoming more expensive, and we're in a water-rich state. I mean, the fact that all of these things that are so critical to the day-to-day life of regular people are basically being stolen from us to the service of a technology that doesn't help us. And the fact that all the political will is still still going directly towards the creation of more and more of these data centers and the force feeding of AI down all of our throats is just beyond me. And where I do think, like I was going back to saying that this is kind of a convergence issue, and one of the things that I feel really that I feel is really important about it is that the people who are against this are across the board. They are as far to the left as you can imagine. They are as far to the right as you can imagine. Everybody from the bottom, part of the population hates these things. and doesn't want anything to do with it. They don't want to lose their jobs. They don't want to lose their water. They don't want to have their electricity become so expensive that for many people are going to lose their homes or their ability to like pay their bills and everything like that. We don't want this. And this is such an incredibly bipartisan thing as far as like the actual people of Ohio and I think the country and probably the world are concerned. And to me, it shows that this is a place where we can actually focus our energy because we can reach across and get a huge coalition of support on this specific issue. And I think that somebody out there in the political realm really needs to start picking up on this to a much higher degree because you are going to win with an anti-AI, anti-data center message. You know, even if it's just like simply putting guardrails on things and making it make some sort of sense. But man, I'm that's something that I'm not seeing a whole lot of yet. It's like I
Oh,
want to see the
Eric,
politicians do something
that's because
about
the
it.
Democrats are so attracted to the money.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw that happen in a Democratic congressional primary here just a couple of weeks ago. Anthropic threw $1 million into a contested Democratic primary in a seat that's a 10+ Republican seat, just so they make sure they can have both candidates in the race, but at the end of the race.
Let me build, Mark, on
And
your
oh
point about
yes.
that.
Yeah.
I think the real underlying problem to all of this can be divided into two issues. One of them is that the Democrats talk in the language of people like us who are highly educated. They don't talk in the language of people who graduated from high school. Donald is masterful at that, and so are many of the people like Ken Paxton. They know how to reach people in a visceral level. But the second problem is that the post-Watergate campaign reform laws have completely and totally backfired. I shared a cab once with a New York State senator from LaGuardia into Manhattan, and I remember him telling me that every morning when he was shaving, he thought about his 10 biggest donors and what they wanted. And he said to me, what they want, they're never going to get, and it's actually bad for some of them. It would hurt them, but they don't realize that. But so I have to demonstrate to them that I'm trying to get what they want. And then he paused and said, but I don't remember once in the last 10 years thinking about my average constituent. And so we have created in the last 50 years this sense of powerlessness, something no one would have predicted in the 60s when there were all these things going on to empower people, teach you how to talk to City Hall, the Right Question project in Boston that was teaching welfare mothers how to talk so that the bureaucrats and the elected municipal leaders would listen to them and not just hear grousing. And we've got to go at the campaign finance system down the road. We can't do it right now. And one of the reforms I'd like to see publicly financed elections because, you get a budget and we'll see how well you use it. But another key reform, and maybe Mark or Lewis can weigh in on the likelihood the Supreme Court would turn this away, is why should someone in California be able to give in my congressional district in New York? Why should I be able to give money to a candidate in Florida? Why can't we have a statute that says we're going to equate dollars with free speech, fine, but only in the district where you are resident?
God, my text would be so much better if that were true. I'm just pummeled with because I'm a pretty regular donor to congressional candidates in Ohio, but I am pummeled by requests from people all over the country.
You think it would be constitutional, Mark?
Yeah, I don't. Unfortunately, I don't think it would. I think it would be no. Unfortunately, I don't think it would be constitutional. But there's no reason you couldn't give greater weight or create some limits. Allow higher contributions from people located in the district as opposed to and lower contributions from people outside. I think campaign limits have been held to be constitutional. But until we get a workaround to Citizens United, that money will just flow around whatever campaign limitations are there anyway. So it's kind of a moot point until then.
I mean, I think that we also need to try to figure out how to get, more different voices in the political ring. I mean, because I think that we hear basically Republicans and Democrats who quite often are basically, in agreement on an awful lot, with like a couple issues, separating them. And we don't hear like a real diversity of ideas and thoughts and just different politics. And I think that if there's like if we're going to deal with the campaign finance, I think the other thing we need to do is deal with like the elections committees and stuff like that in order to make sure that we can actually get a diversity of voices and thoughts into the political sphere.
I think that the fund campaign finance, though, I think that you can statutorily accomplish some things. For example, I don't think the Supreme Court, and I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but I don't think the Supreme Court's decision, if about confidentiality of giving is sacrosanct in terms of the First Amendment. In other words, the secrecy. I think that lifting the secrecy can happen by statute. But I think two other things that can happen, and I think they need to happen, and it's going to be 10 years or longer probably, but in that it's constitutional amendment or a new Supreme Court and limits on the Supreme Court, and probably the fastest would be changing the Supreme Court. So that we essentially will be able to essentially address the issue of the First Amendment, but the rulings on the First Amendment in relationship to campaign finance.
Well, Eric, I appreciate you bringing all of that up because I was just translating my mind with all of the Star Wars paraphernalia in the background and my knowledge of your appreciation of the story of the Force. That's what we're calling our AI data center in Utah is the Death Star. So it certainly lacks a little subtlety, but that's what it is. And it is bringing everybody to the fore. But I want to turn this to our closing thoughts. And boy, have we had a robust conversation, Mr. Black. William K. Black, a PhD criminologist, a professor of criminology at University of Minnesota, and really probably the most successful and most well known for his time as a regulator, particularly in the savings and loan crisis, and having written the book, The Best Way to Rob a Bank is to Own One, is in the catbird seat now. Because a couple of things that we haven't touched upon is, of course, this ridiculous slush fund named right, on the eve of the anniversary of the American Revolution, with $1.776 billion for insurrectionists, doesn't, obviously exemplifies everything else that we've been talking about. Bill, how do you bring this all together? And also the message, I think, to the Democrats, because the urgency for me is it's like, it's the end of the line. If we don't get control of this for restoring the law, and being able to hold accountable the corruption we can all plainly see, what credibility does this country have?
Okay, so what do we know from criminology? What do I know from experience in all of this? First, criminals and predators are not necessarily specialists. And this is part of David's story, right? And so the whole separation between blue collar and white collar and corruption, that's nonsense. At this level, they embody any and all of those. Those are just tactical questions within the grand strategy. And the grand strategy is that they want to be able to have a sure thing, and they want it with impunity, right? So these are not people that are going to prevail in honest business. They know they're not going to prevail in honest business, so they want to cheat, and they know that the great risks are the law, an effective press, and whistleblowers, which is why those are the three demons, which is why all three of those areas have been targeted and targeted by their allies. So again, it might be harder if you were a street thug to put together the contributions, but if you're a corporate thief, it's, you know, they want you in their office as long as you're making the contributions. And the contribution that is massive from the perspective of a politician is chump change from the perspective of any elite criminal. So the greatest bargain in the world is politicians. And you are absolutely right. You can't just focus on the Republicans. The Democrats have a very long pattern of this as well, which is why we keep emphasizing you can't just say no more kings. You got to say no more robber barons, because the robber barons are quite happy to corrupt Democrats and Republicans. They have typically no real ideology. It certainly doesn't surpass their interests, which again are a sure thing with impunity. Why do they find useful idiots? Why do we have that phrase, useful idiots? Well, again, that particular phrase had some political valence in terms of communism and such, but that concept has long existed in criminology. Right. And this is the next thing that some of what June was talking about. We not only have different traits as human, we frequently have constellations of traits. So that, for example, the worst people in the world, who we find are immensely disproportionately criminals, are the dark triad or the dark tetrad. And the tetrad adds something that you're seeing hasn't been given enough emphasis, and that's sadism. And that's important to the whole Epstein stuff, right? These are people that are the worst of the worst. They just don't simply want sexual access, and to very young people, they enjoy inflicting pain on people, right? They also tend to be incompetent. Incompetence is fine from the perspective of the elite thieves. They don't care whether the politician is incompetent. They just care whether they're going to deliver. And that's why that fancy word kakistocracy isn't, emphasized as much as it needs to be. This, you get a group of people because they can't have any ethics, because they have to go into, even the lawyers have to go into court and perjure themselves on a regular basis in the Trump administration. They have to lie continuously. The Larry Ellisons of the world, they don't want competence. They want to destroy 60 Minutes, not make 60 Minutes effective, right? Anywhere they find independence, courage, honesty, that's a threat. People keep on going in the press. How can it be that all this insane stuff is happening and the stock market goes up? Because the stock market is overwhelmingly dominated by incredibly wealthy people who think corruption is great, who think that the Trump administration is going to give them immense amounts of money for the equivalent of chump change. So is it true that the Trump family is more corrupt than any president and his family in history? Yes, it's not even close, but it is still chump change from the perspective of the elite criminals. So of course the stock market goes up as you get this increased corruption, because they're going to do incredible amounts. The amount of money they get when they direct $3 billion government procurement contracts to them, compared to a mere, 300 million for the Trump kiddos and such, makes this vastly the most profitable thing they will ever do in their lives. The normal economics of competition that you would be taught in any program would that it produces zero economic profit. And that's a specialized meaning, but basically it means a really tiny profit sufficient to stay in business and be able to raise get a bank loan type of thing. So that's maybe, depending on your business, 8% to 16% returns. They're getting hundreds, sometimes thousands % returns out of these fraud schemes. So yeah, the stock market's going to love that forever. And it isn't just that they're making the law ineffective. They are making the law a weapon. And they're making it a weapon against the best people, the ones that are brave. They want to destroy whistleblowers. And you heard exactly right. Again, the 3 colleagues of mine that blew the whistle on the 5 U.S. senators on the savings and loan debacle, to this day, I do not know the political affiliation, if any, of my 3 colleagues. Because it wasn't relevant. We never talked about that stuff. We just talked about how you would take on the crooks and rein them in and their political opponents. And I guarantee, those were, as I've said, mostly Democrats. I was a Democrat. They were working in league with Republicans, with the Reagan administration. There is no honor for principle among thieves, but it's actually easy for them to find a community of interest. And unlike where you actually bribe the person directly, you simply make it in their financial interest. And that's why it's so reliable. That's why in the great financial crisis, every single deal to rate credit rating on a CDO, which collateralized debt obligations, just think of this as something that was going to blow up the world, where it wasn't even a single C, which is the worst possible credit rating that the agency could give. Every single one of those tranches got a AAA. And you could run that experiment to the end of time, and they would all get a AAA until they blew up the world. You don't have to bribe folks. You can use this hiring them to signal what you want, to incentivize what you want, and to communicate and reward what you want without any danger of prosecution. You could have everybody flip under you, and there would never have been a quid pro quo discussion. I can do that with modern executive compensation. As to the thing about restricting stuff, you should look at the Hawaii experiment, which is going on now. And the one remarkable thing there is that the state legislature almost unanimously, regardless of party, voted for a statute which says something good about Hawaii.
I have a final comment for you, Patrick.
Please.
I've dealt with data centers by putting them on my property exam. The question, can you get rid of them? Is it constitutional?
I have one last one. The President of the United States and his Injustice Department attempted, and they made huge investments in this, to prosecute criminally the chairman of the Federal Reserve because there were cost overruns. Yesterday, or within the last 2 days, Trump gave one of his press statements in which he was talking about the reflecting pond and the whole contracting process. And he said, and it's only going to cost this. Well, of course, except for overruns. And, overruns happen all the time in construction. He was quite willing to try to put someone in prison for an overrun that the man had absolutely nothing to do with.
Every time we have these recordings, I feel like the luckiest person in the world. I've been through hell and back. I lost everything after the great financial crisis, and my whole world exploded. And I went on an amazing journey with my colleague Eric Vaughn, where I asked the question at the very beginning of our first film together: I'm not expendable. Chances are you're not either. And our colleague had actually framed it that how did we go from of, for, and by the people to of, by, and for the corrupt corporation. And this many years later, we've pretty much checked off every box of every question we've ever asked. And again, the new Untouchables with David Kaye Johnston today, providing this information starting decades ago. Every single person on this panel has been in the trenches, in the belly of the beast of this warfare between not lawfare in the way that this corrupt administration perverts everything, but literally against the bad guys the whole time. And yet, like Bill taught us eons ago, it's not necessary to hope, to persevere, and there's never just outright victory. It's just something every generation has to find and fight, and that's why we do this. And on behalf of the new Untouchables, I'm just humbled as always. My name is Patrick Lovell. I'm just the guy who asks questions, but I get really good answers from some of the best in the business. David Kaye Johnston, thank you so much for your time today. Mark Dan, as always, absolutely incredible. June Carbone, it doesn't get much more profound than that. My colleague Eric Vaughn, Lewis Clark, who he and his team every single day, they have access to thousands of stories in this system that we have to get out to the American people, just like whistleblowers throughout the generations. Because can you imagine, America, what you're not hearing given what we're all seeing? And then, of course, I'm going to just call him Gandalf. Gandalf, the great wizard, which is William K. Black. I know he certainly doesn't like accolades because he just does what he does. But on behalf of America, I thank you all. And please, everybody out there, this is the truth. Will you please like, subscribe, and share, and let everybody know there's professionals who know how to turn the tables on this madness? If and only if we can get millions of people to get on the right side of this thing. I know you're out there. Please join us. And until next time, everyone, onwards and upwards. We'll catch you next week. All the best.
Thanks.